Welcome back to Velshi and Rule. President Trump is continuing his racist attacks against Democratic Congressman Elijah Cummings and the city of Baltimore for a third day in a row. This morning, he took to Twitter and said this, in quote, "The fact is, Baltimore can be brought back, maybe even to new heights of success and glory, but not with King Elijah and that crew. When the leaders of Baltimore want to see the city rise again, I'm in a very beautiful oval-shaped office waiting for your call." The president's aides say this is not about race. Here's acting White House Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney.
I think it's right for the president to raise the issue of, look, I was in Congress for 6 years. If I had poverty in my district like they have in Baltimore, if I had crime in my district like they have in Chicago, if I had homelessness in my district like they have in San Francisco, and I spent all of my time in Washington, D.C. chasing down this Mueller investigation, this bizarre impeachment crusade, I'd get fired. And I think the president is right to raise that. It has absolutely zero to do with race.
Joining me now, the one and only Charlemagne the God. His radio show, The Breakfast Club, is syndicated in 90 markets across the nation. That means 8 million listeners a month. His audience is 77% African American or Hispanic. That makes up nearly 1/3 of the Democratic Party electorate. This man has interviewed half of the 2020 Democratic contenders for president, and I promise you, the other half know that they need to pay him a visit. Charlemagne, I'm really glad you're here with me today.
Thank you for having me.
I want to get your take. President Trump went after a black congressman over the weekend. He went after his predominantly black district. A week ago, he said that 4 congresswomen of color should go back home. This is the same guy who said our first black president was not born in the United States. And he is quoted as saying when going through a rough urban neighborhood, only blacks would live like that. What he did this weekend is not new. It's not surprising. Why is he doing it?
Because he's a racist. You know what I'm saying? But we will never get like America to do anything collectively about racism. Like you can implement legislation, you can implement policies, you can implement bills, but none of that will change what's in a person's heart. Like racism is the American way. In fact, like the Pledge of Allegiance shouldn't be liberty and justice for all. It should be liberty and justice for whites and racism for everybody else. And that's what he represents.
Then what do you think is worse, calling Baltimore rat-infested or calling Elijah Cummings a racist?
Calling Elijah Cummings a racist? I don't see how Elijah Cummings could be a racist. You know what I'm saying? I think it's all bad, you know? And I mean, let's be clear, Baltimore is in bad shape, but I mean, just like every inner city in America that has a high population of black people is in bad shape, you know what I'm saying? Because it's not the people in Baltimore or the citizens of Baltimore's fault, it's systemic racism's fault, and it's oppression, and it's marginalization, and it's the same systemic racism that Donald Trump has been pushing before he was president of the United States of America.
But before that, could the president push, I'm going to change it, I'm going to make it better, blame them, because he wasn't in office? So this weekend, he goes after Elijah Cummings, but he didn't go after him and say, and here's my new Marshall Plan to save Baltimore and all these other oppressed communities. He pointed the finger and then sat back in the Oval Office. Will voters say, hold on a second, you've been president. What did you actually do?
Absolutely. You're the president of the United States of America. If you think that, you know, Baltimore is a problem, then go fix it. Send some federal aid there. You know, you want to make America great again, then start with Baltimore. You know, but once again, it's just systemic racism and oppression. That's the only reason he's having this conversation. But we're letting him distract us from the fact that it started with the conversation about the kids at the border. Like, let's get back to that. Like, don't let him change the subject so easily by talking about Baltimore. Because Donald Trump don't give a damn about those black kids in Baltimore or those brown kids at the border. Let's be clear on that.
So should we not be addressing it? So if you ignore the president when he has an attack like this, you should focus on other. We should just say, no, let's just talk about Robert Mueller and health care and the kids at the border. If you're silent, what does that do? Truly normalize racism?
No, I think that you have to speak up about it. You know what I'm saying? But we have to speak up about what the whole totality of what's really going on. Like, I think that what we're experiencing right now in America is fascism. You know what I'm saying? Fascism is something that's going to impact all Americans, period. And that's where we are as a country right now. Everything that Donald Trump is doing is part of a larger fascist agenda, if you ask me.
Okay, well, then you have said if he doesn't end up in jail, he'll be reelected.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the news cycle.
Okay.
If he hadn't said this on Saturday, what would have been on the Sunday shows? Digging through Robert Mueller and what we learned in his testimony, the increasing number of Democrats who are calling for impeachment. So from a political standpoint, because he changed that subject, is it a winning argument? Because a week, 2 weeks, 2 years ago, people established he's racist.
That's why we have to stay on message. I mean, I think it's crazy that Robert Mueller can say in his Mueller report that the Russians interfered with the election. And you have investigations that say Russians interfered in the elections in all 50 states. And then they try to pass an election security bill and the Republicans shut it down. What is that telling you? Your president is a Russian agent and the Republicans are aiding and abetting this whole relationship. Like, period. Like, why is nobody having that conversation?
People are having that conversation.
It's not loud enough. Baltimore is loud, which it should be, but come on, like this is the stake of the whole country. I think democracy as we know it in America is dead.
Well, the GOP, that is saying something.
I really do. I mean, this guy controls the Department of Justice at this point. You know, the Senate is ran by Republicans. He basically has the Supreme Court in his pocket. Like, what can we really do in 2020 if he has the deck stacked against the country like that?
Okay, well, then take me to the American voter. Mm-hmm. Because the American voter, all of us, or anyone who tuned in or read a paper knows what the president said about Elijah Cummings on Saturday, Sunday, and now today. And the GOP has basically said nothing. So does that mean that this is not going to hurt the president in the polls?
Is it going to hurt the president in the polls?
Yeah, the GOP supports him because they know exactly what their voter cares about and what their voter wants.
Absolutely. And I think that, you know, Republicans are just like, it benefits them. Like, they're doing whatever they have to do to stay in power. That's what I think.
Take me to black voters, and I realize there's not one black vote, but black voters came out in droves to support Barack Obama. Less so for Hillary Clinton. You yourself have said that Hillary Clinton and other Democrats have taken the black vote for granted. Given what the president has done over the last 2 years, is that enough to get black voters motivated again to go out and vote for him in a big way?
I mean, if they know what I know, that they should. Because, you know, if America is in danger, like, who you think is going to be impacted the most by whatever racist policies, you know, whatever policies that oppress, whatever policies that marginalize, like, who's next to be in concentration camps in America? It's not going to be white people, I don't think. So if we know what's good for us, we will definitely go out there and vote. But I don't think it's anything wrong with making sure that the Democrats have a black agenda. Like, we've been loyal to the Democrats for a long time, and what have Democrats really done for us in a real way? So I don't think there's anything wrong with, you know, asking Democrats to have a specific black agenda. Don't hit us with the whole "a rising tide lifts all boats," because we know black people's boat has a hole in it. So it doesn't rise with the rest of America.
Well, when the president said to black voters 2 years ago, "What do you have to lose?" I'm not saying it motivated them to go vote for him, but it did speak to some voters. Can Democrats point to the last 2 years and say, well, hold on a second, whether you're talking about working class white voters or black voters, you gave a big corporate tax cut and you're looking to roll back health care protections. He doesn't have a track record at this point that does anything to help white or black working class voters.
Yes, I would hope that there's no black or brown person even looking in the direction of Donald Trump or any of the Republicans, simply because the Republicans have sat back and let Donald Trump do all of this dirt and nobody is really saying anything. So why should we trust anybody on that side? And I mean, we can't really trust anybody on the other side either, but they have done slightly more for us than the other side has. But that really isn't saying much and nothing anyway.
Well, there is one former prosecutor who you believe can take on the president.
Yes.
And it's Kamala Harris.
Yeah.
Why?
I think Senator Harris, you know, like, let's be clear, Donald Trump is the bad guy. He's a villain. Senator Harris is one of the best prosecutors in the country. I think that she should be prosecuting the case against Donald Trump in the court of public opinion. I think she should be in those red states, you know, talking to those white voters who may not know exactly what Donald Trump is doing in this country, all the crimes that he's gotten away with, and playing the case out against him. I think that every time she talks about Donald Trump, it should sound like a closing argument. Every single time. And I think that she's best to go against him on the debate stage as well. Because it's a prosecutor against a villain, against a bad guy.
Okay, well then take me to the black voter, because she's gotten a whole lot of criticism for her tough record as a prosecutor. Will that criticism fade away if she wins the nomination and it's Harris versus Trump?
I think anybody who is, you know, looking at Senator Harris's past as a prosecutor, looking at her record as a prosecutor, and saying that they have a problem with that, but they're co-signing Joe Biden, I just think that they're not being real with themselves, because Joe Biden is the author of the 94 crime bill. You know, Joe Biden wrote the 88 crime initiative that got people that were, when you get caught with crack, you got more time than, you know, getting caught with powdered cocaine. So what affected black and brown people more than those two pieces of legislation? So if you're upset with Senator Harris because you say, oh, she's a prosecutor and she locked black and brown people up, but you're riding with Joe Biden, that's kind of, you know, I think intellectually inconsistent.
Charlemagne, you started the Breakfast Club in 2010, mostly to talk about hip hop. Fast forward to today, I said it before, you've sat down with half the candidates, the other half are just waiting to get scheduled. Did you think you were going to become this voice of influence? And now that you are, what's the most important insight you can share into what matters to your listeners?
I'm gonna be honest with you, I haven't thought about it as me being a voice of influence.
But you are.
True, but I'm just an American citizen with a vote, and I care about my people. And hip hop has always been bigger than just whatever, you know, people watching this may think hip hop is. Hip hop has always been political. Hip hop has always talked about things of socially redeeming value. You know what I'm saying? Hip hop has always talked about what is going on in our communities, what is going on in our countries. I mean, whether it was Public Enemy, whether it was Ice Cube, you know, like all of these guys have always spoken about things that are going on. People now like Killer Mike and, you know, T.I., like Kendrick Lamar, like these guys talk about what's going on in our country. So hip hop has never been in a box. It's just that y'all just started paying attention to what we had to say.
Then if you sat down with President Trump,
ugh,
you wouldn't sit down with him? He's the president.
I just don't feel like it would be a productive conversation. I think that would be just a conversation for entertainment purposes. It would be great, you know, publicity for our show. It would be great ratings-wise, but he doesn't really need to be sitting down with me. He needs to be sitting down with the Elijah Cummings of the world and the Maxine Waters and the John Lewises and, you know, the people who actually have a stake in this country in that way. Like, you know, I don't see why he would be talking to me other than for entertainment purposes. Because it's not like he gives a damn about black people. It's not like he gives a damn about brown people. So what would he be talking to me for other than entertainment purposes?
Hey, MSNBC fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down there and click on any of the videos here to watch the latest interviews and highlights. You can get more MSNBC for free every day with our newsletters. Just visit msnbc.com/newsletters to sign up now.